and this is From the Black Pool of Genius. Hello, how is everyone doing? I hope that you are in great health and spirits wherever you may be. I am your host, Serious One. Now, if you know me by a first name basis, that's cool, but on this show, I'm going by Serious One. I always thought that was a dope name. If I was a DJ, that would be my name. DJ Serious One on your dial. But all jokes aside, the topic of the show is something that I find to be very important, and that is the ineptness, the short-sightedness, the historical inaccuracies, and overall incorrectness of the FBA and ADOS movements, hashtag movements, quote-unquote movements. Now, if you don't know what FBA and ADOS are, FBA is Foundation of Black Americans, and ADOS is American Descendants of Slaves. Now, before I dive into deconstructing why I think that these so-called movements are detrimental, short-sighted, and overall incorrect in being a solution for our people, I do think that it is important and pertinent and needed that our people in the diaspora, especially in North America, have a collective identity that we agree upon. Something that we can come together, that is not based on a lie, that does not ignore our heritage, that is not antagonistic to our cousins in the diaspora, be they in the Caribbean, South America, or on the continent, but something that is beneficial for us, that is created by us, that is not an identity that's thrown on us, and that we can see the world through our own eyes and collective identity, and not through an identity that was makeshift and made and thrown on us by outsiders. So, with that said, FBA, let's dive into it. There's so much to get into, and I don't want to keep us too long. I mean, there's so much to unpack. So, FBA, right? Foundational Black American. Now, I find this title to be problematic off the rip. The first thing that comes to my mind is, what foundation are you talking about? Where's the foundation? And then I ask myself, can you have a foundation in oppression? Can you have a foundation in colonialism or being colonized? Can you have a foundation in being held captive? Can you have a foundation in a place that continually antagonizes, demeans, dehumanizes, enslaves, kills, robs, maims, commits slow genocide, and does everything it can to undermine you, sullies your image in the media 24/7, 365 since the inception of the printing press? Can you really have a foundation in that? Because when I look around, I don't see a foundation. I see a continual disruption. I see a continual disfiguration. I see a continual dismantling of any foundation our people try to build, whether that be for themselves or whether that be attempting to integrate. So what foundation are you talking about? Can we get into the history? If we look at this, let's just run down the history real quick. Let's look at prior to and right before the inception of this country in the American Revolutionary War and up to today. Let's look at what foundation you were talking about. Are you talking about the foundation where this country was conceived to keep our people enslaved? What do I mean by that? A great book to look up and research and read, and a scholar to research and read. And he's also on YouTube. He has several interviews and videos that you might want to check out, is The Counter-Revolution of 1776 by Dr. Gerald Horne. Now, in this book, he breaks down how the inception of this country was partly, if not primarily, due to the shift in the move for the British to end slavery or abolish slavery. Now, that might seem far-fetched and, far-flung to you, but he makes a very compelling argument. If you look at the details, it starts to make sense. So what happened? Real quick, the British were threatening to abolish slavery. Why? For several reasons, but primarily they were losing money, they were losing lives, they were losing resources. They had issues in the Caribbean with their colonies where they were outnumbered 10-1, 15-1, 20-1 in some places, and revolts were happening. People were losing lives. They weren't making as much money as they thought they would. They were almost losing their colonies, and they were industrialized for the most part. There was a war called the 7 Years' War, where they lost so much money. I mean, they won the war, but they lost so much money that they had to recoup, as they say. So what did they do? They put a tax on all imports in the colonies. And of course, the primary import was African people. Yes, human trafficking is the origin of this country. That's the foundation that you want to put yourself on. The foundation of trafficking your humans as your ancestors as the primary product and chattel. Interesting, right? But long story short, there was a tax on importing Africans. They were threatening to abolish slavery. They were threatening to arm Africans to fight in the wars that the colonists or the settlers, the bottom feeders of Europe that they shipped over here to do the dirty work, they were threatening to arm Africans because the colonists didn't want to fight in the wars that the British were fighting against the Spanish and the French and the Portuguese and the other colonies. So they were threatening to arm Africans, and that put terror and fear in the settlers' mind. Yes, the same bottom feeders that they brought over in the first place to also be, the underclass and permanent undergirding of the country before they created this mythical aspirational whiteness, that people jumped on and, tried to look down on Africa simply because their behinds are pink. Yeah, they created that myth of middle management, as the late great Patrice O'Neill said, to look down on other people so they can have this myth of whiteness and, aspire to something, even though the rich 1% pretty much were slave owners. Most of the people in the United States were not slave owners. Plantation slavery was not the primary mode of enslavement in the States. So they gave them an aspiration, something to aspire to. So they rebelled and they fought against the British to hold and maintain and control slavery. And if you look at the history, the numbers of Africans that were imported into what became the United States shot up during and after the American Revolutionary War. They dominated the tail end of the slave trade. I mean, the United States had an internal trade. They were shipping Africans from the north into the south. They were shipping the deep south. So from the biggest states like Virginia, North Carolina, and to, even South Carolina, into Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana when they gained control of it, Florida when they gained control of it, Texas when they gained control of it. So they had an internal trade in the states, and they had a trade along the Americas. And since the United States didn't have the relationships that the European countries had on the coast of Africa with these dungeons that they created, or these castles, forts that they created, they were pirates. So they were pirating ships from the Portuguese primarily, the French, and the Spanish. This is one of the reasons why it's so hard to trace lineage, as the lady from the ADOS movement likes to say, is because the USA were pirates. They didn't have records. Why have records when you're stealing somebody's ship? But is that the foundation you're talking about? Well, let's talk about the and it's funny because when you look at the history of the Civil War, which I'm about to get into next, if you want to get into that foundation, is that as a foundation? The South, or the Confederates, thought that they were following the footsteps of the Patriots, and fighting to uphold and take control of enslavement, which was the cash cow: rice, tobacco, cotton, sugar. So is that what you're talking about when you talk about a foundation? The Civil War, let's get into it. Right after the Civil War, what happened? You had the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to protect the newly freed Africans in the South, who were primarily in the South, to help them, integrate and become full citizens. So by that, they were creating schools for the Africans. They were establishing banks for the Africans. They were helping them take their skills to acquire land and real estate. During this period, the literacy rate jumped by 50%, over 50%. You had more black senators in the United States history at that time, during more than any other time in American history. But what happened? There was a compromise in 1876 and 1877. The presidential election happened. The Republican candidate in the North made a compromise with the people at the Democratic South that said, if you let us have this presidential, candidacy, then we'll take the We'll take the Freedmen's Bureau out of the South. So what happened? Shortly thereafter, the Freedmen's Bureau was removed, and you had terrorism running amok in the South. Eurasian terrorism. What is that? The KKK, the NRA. You shortly thereafter had Jim Crow being established. Sharecropping, being pushed, which is pretty much another form of slavery. And if you want to even get into the 13th Amendment, which is a loophole for slavery, because it says, and I'm paraphrasing, slavery is abolished except for by punishment by crime, or punishment of crime. And we know who's the most criminalized people in the country, literally and figuratively. So what are you talking about, foundation? Is that the foundation you're talking about? The abolishing of the Freedmen's Bureau in this country, again, creating loopholes to keep you in bondage and enslavement and undermine you? Or can we look at the Red Summers of the early 20th century, the 1919 and 1921, 23, where black people created their own towns and cities and had their own self-sustaining, towns, cities, businesses that were undermined, that were ran down, that were ran through by jealous Eurasians? Is that the foundation you're talking about? When African people had all the skills and the talents and abilities, because that's why they were brought over here, not only because of their physical prowess, but because of their agricultural skills, their mathematical skills, their architectural skills. That is the reason why they were acquired and brought over here. But then when the United States saw that, okay, Africans, we outnumber them 3 to 1, but if we don't import more Europeans, they have all the skills, they're going to take over quickly. So what did? They imported Europeans from areas they deemed less desirable, areas that were not dominated by Western Europeans, such as Southern Europe, the Italians, the Irish, even Eastern Europeans and Russians. So they literally imported Europeans to make the country wider, so they can give them the low wage earning jobs that they didn't want to give Africans, because Africans had the skills to demand and control industries. Is that the foundation you're talking about? I really want to know. Let's move forward. World War II, you have the New Deal that happened because of the Great Depression. And during this New Deal, there was a GI Bill. There was, housing loans that were created that were cheaper, so people could acquire land easily. And when African people went over and fought in this world war, which was really a Eurasian war for domination and control of African resources, against the Germans and the Italians, what happened? They came home and they were denied the housing loans. They were denied the GI Bill. So they were literally frozen out of all the benefits that a generation acquired and were able to establish wealth for themselves. Is that the foundation you're talking about? It doesn't seem like a foundation to me. It seems like a foundation of blockage, literal cock blockage. Is that the foundation you're talking about? Really? And we could look up to today. There's so many articles about how during 2008, the housing crisis that happened, it was mainly because of predatory loans given to black folks. And we know how homes are devalued by banks and private corporations because they're owned by black people. Gentrification. And there was an article that just came out a few months ago by Citigroup about how the United States alone in the last 20 years has lost $16 trillion estimated in the last 20 years because of how racist the banking industry has been, how racist the home mortgage and loan system has been. So is that the foundation you're talking about? But moving forward, because there's so much to get into, and I didn't even touch on ADOS yet. We can look at the 1960s with COINTELPRO and FBI and the CIA. What country creates a espionage industry or espionage, system to undermine a people that simply, for the most part, wanted to integrate? Now, there was a push to create our own nation, but for the most part, most people want integration. And they still went to undermine and demean and destroy that to prevent the rise of the Black Messiah. That's their mission statement. That's not our mission statement. That's the mission statement of COINTELPRO, a counterintelligence program, which I dare say some of you are acting like. So is that the foundation you're talking about? What foundation are you talking about? I really want to see it. Can we talk about Nixon? And it's now come out that he pretty much, pushed drugs in Black communities and pushed a whole propaganda campaign to not only push African people as drug dealers and users, but to demonize them and imprison them to fuel the prison industrial complex. Is that the foundation you're talking about? We already know Reaganomics in the 80s, trickle down economics, and we know money doesn't trickle down, trickles up. So is that the foundation you're talking about? I mean, I really would like to know. And let me save some for ADOS, because I think I've thoroughly taken apart even the foundational part of anything you're talking about. ADOS loves to talk about this aspirational nature of Black folks in America, but I would dare say that you calling yourselves American first, American descendants of slaves, is aspirational. I mean, we don't even have to get into the technicality of what America is. We know that there are continents. You didn't call yourself United States citizens, descendants of slaves, or United States descendants of slaves. You just call yourselves American descendants of slaves, which is goofy in my opinion. But let's get into that Americanness. Are you talking about the Americanness of the war on drugs, as I talked about earlier? The Voters' Rights Act? What other people in this country need a Voters' Rights Act in order to vote that needs to be renewed every few decades? If you truly are American, why do you need that? No one else needs it. But you're American and you're not aspirational in your Americanness. And this is about lineage, right? And data, right? But how can you ignore the Africanness of our people that has permeated, even though it has been undermined and tried to, they have attempt to stomp out our Africanness, yet we still, it oozes out of us in every way. So much so that we've inspired people on the continent to embrace their Africanness. We've inspired movements on the African continent and Pan-Africanism that was quelled and stomped out by the help of Western nations and with the CIA and the FBI. And we know this. So what are you talking about? We ain't African. We are American descendants of slaves. Are you talking about the Americanness when our people were running away from white terrorism in the South? Because a majority of us come from the South. I mean, South Carolina was the biggest, Charleston was the biggest port to import Africans from Africa. So are you talking about when our people were fleeing terrorism in the South during Jim Crow, that they came up to the North and they looked to acquire homes and get into businesses and buy their own, build their own businesses and work in these factories, and were shut out, slyly shut out? They were blocked from buying property, business avenue properties or prime real estate properties. The rates were jacked up on them where they had to rent and they couldn't buy to own, or they couldn't buy land. They could, because it was so they were priced out of it. And suburbs were created to siphon money out of the cities into these suburbs, and they were blocked from there too. Is that the Americanness you're talking about? That you love to claim we're so aspirational and I look for wealth, but you're aspirational and you look for Americanness. We have never been American. And since we love to talk about the data, I've seen you talk several times about the prison rates and how this country has done, a disservice to our people, and yet you still aspire to be American. But let's look at the prison rates. Now, this country has the largest prison population percentage-wise. 25% of the prison population comes from the United States, yet the United States only represents 5% of the global population. Now, let's do some numbers real quick. A lot of people aren't numbers people, but I'll try to make this as simple and straightforward as possible. 25% of the global prison population is represented in America. Now, in America, let's just be generous. They say we're 13 to 15%. Let's give us 15%. We are 15 as Black people or African people, or ADOS as you like to claim. We are 15% of the United States population. And we know a far majority of the people that are in prison or under state supervision or in jail are men or males. So 15% of a population, let's split that in half down the middle. So you got 7.5. 7.5% of a population in one country represents half of the global prison population. And that's, you're American? You're American? Huh? Really? That's how American you are? It looks like they treating you like Africans to me. An African descendant I mean, last I checked, the 13th Amendment says slavery is illegal except for punishment by crime. So they're literally criminalizing you because you are African, as I said earlier. But you are American. You're an American descendant of slaves. It's just goofy. It makes no sense. And I mean, there's so many articles coming out. There's so much information and data, as you like to say, about the wealth disparities and how, you know, just because there's an article that came out a few months ago, like that was talking about just because your parents were rich and you were born rich doesn't mean that you're more likely to die rich, especially if you're a black man. You know, black men are the most likely to fall into poverty, even though their parents are rich. Why is that? It's not because our people don't know how to manage money. It's not because our people don't have the intellectual ability or the know-how. It's because we have been systematically shut out of any network or function or system that is able to keep us wealthy. This country was created, functions, and systematically thrives on destabilizing and keeping us broke, impoverished, and exploited. But no one wants to say that. No one wants to, you know, just call it what it is and not be aspirational in their Americanness or aspirational in their mythical foundation. You ain't American. You're only American when you go overseas, and that's just because how other people see you. They don't know what's going on. Half of them don't know what's going on in their country. How they going to tell you what's going on over here? They don't know the propaganda. They don't know how things work. So what are you talking about, American descendant? Well, you make no sense. I mean, there's so much more I can get into. I think I've broke down enough. There's so much that you can research. The underemployment, the undereducation, the undervaluing, the undermining, you know, police brutality. There's so much that shows you that these people will never accept you. These people will never allow you to thrive. Yet you're calling yourself a foundational, and this is the last point I'll get on because I think I've gone on long enough, but it's antagonistic nature against people of the from the continent in the island. And not saying that there aren't conflicts that are there, of course there are, but let's look at the history, since y'all seen the lack historical accuracy. The reason why we are here as a people is because we are a culmination of African people that were fighting on a continent and ended up in the same place in an amalgamation of one. The reason why we're here because the Eurasians were on one side, tell them go get them. Then they were on the other side, tell them go get them. They literally ate the continent inside out. Early on, a lot of people were stolen from the hinterlands or the inlands, and then as it moved on and people started migrating and shifting around, they started stealing people from the coast. So you literally played one side versus the other. And that's pretty much what y'all are doing right now. This fake tribalism that y'all trying to create, that doesn't make sense when y'all act like sellouts only come from the continent. When if we look at our story and our history and we see that during the revolts that were happening during enslavement, there was someone always trying to get their meritorious manumissions. And we can move up to modern times when most of our movements were undermined by somebody, you know, selling out. Who sold out Malcolm? Who sold out Martin? Who sold out the Panthers? Who undermined W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, so on and so forth. So that narrative is tired that you're pushing. And also this whole lie about them selling us. Let's get it correctly. We come from a culmination of people that were fighting each other on the continent. So you can't simplify it and say, oh, they sold us. No, we come from groups that were fighting and selling each other. Save the lives for somebody that doesn't know. And I know most people don't know because they don't research. But with that, I think I've gone on long enough. What are your thoughts, feelings, and opinions? Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you on the next one. Peace, everyone.